Something's going on. Weather's going crazy. People are crazy too. Something's going on. What we gonna do? Fears come out of hiding. Anger's just behind. People with guns everywhere. The president's lost his mind. Time to trust. Time to know. Something's going on. It's time to grow. Time to trust. Time to know. Something's going on. It's time to grow.
Hello, my name is Daryl Robert Schoon. And when I was interviewed by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove on his YouTube channel, Thinking Aloud, I made the comment, it's not a good sign when hippies talk about money. I mean, Jeffrey doesn't look like a hippie now, but he was one. That's where I met him in 1971 at my Chinese restaurant in Berkeley, the Great Shanghai Steel and Iron Works. Now Jeffrey's got a YouTube channel and he's had his own TV show on PBS, and he's made quite a name for himself. Anyway, it may not be a good sign when hippies talk about money, but I'll let you make that decision for yourself, because I am a hippie and I am going to talk about money. But I'm going to talk about it from a different point of view than I think most of you have heard. And I'm going to talk about it in reference to what is going to happen to us economically and spiritually in the end. So when we do that, I'd like to refer to my book. I talked about it the last time, Docking to the Mothership. I wrote Docking to the Mothership in 2022, and it's a little bit before its time. When I wrote my book on money, Time of the Vulture, I published it in 2007. And the collapse happened within a year after that, September 2008. The collapse began that year, and today in 2026, it's reaching its end stage. It's crossed into the end stage, and events are going to begin unfolding quite rapidly. Docking to the Mothership was written in 2022, and it describes what is about to happen, not just in financial terms, though it does. Probably 25% of the book is my articles that I've written on economics. And I'm going to be quoting from that book today because it contains the information that I think it is going to be needed in the days ahead. And I quote from a number of sources. But before I start it, I want to preface it with something about myself, which may encourage you to believe me in a way that you hadn't before. When I presented my talk at the Positive and Deviant Network at Marshall Thurber's group, it was a private membership-only group. Dues were $5,000 a year. Around 60 to 70 of us were members, and we met 4 times a year to discuss different subjects. And it was Marshall's experiment to find out what happened when what he called positive deviants, out-of-the-box thinkers, I think would be one way to describe it, successful, highly successful out-of-the-box thinkers, and see what would happen. Well, in 2007, when I gave my talk, it wasn't well received. And I said this before. I predicted that the United States and the world was about to enter a severe economic crisis that was going to end in the collapse of markets, even worse than the Great Depression. And I said the value of money, paper money, was at risk and it was basically go to zero. And gold and silver were going to be the only hedges in what was about to happen. Well, there was a lot of money in that room, and a lot of people were upset. One person, however, he started buying $10,000 worth of gold a month for the next few years. At that meeting, Marshall had arranged for a teleconference, a phone call with Dr. Philip Tetlock. And Dr. Tetlock had made a name for himself as a forecaster, as a predictor. He had written a book called, I think, Super Forecasting. And it was based on his work that he had done in the 1970s and 1980s and 1990s. As a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, he sent out a questionnaire to a large group of people with a question: how do you think the Cold War is going to end? This was in the 1970s. And all these people wrote in their answers. After all, this was a real bona fide test by a bona fide professor from a bona fide university. And they wanted to cast their hat in the ring. And, everybody had an opinion, or at least until then, now they were thinking about how it might end. Well, in 1991, 92, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the Cold War, as we knew it then, ended. And so now Tetlock had his answer. Not only had he had his answer on how the Cold War ended, he had the answers of all these other people. So he began examining them to see who was right and who was wrong. Well, what Tetlock found out was very interesting. These were real world answers to a very real situation that he had in his hand. And he found out that the so-called experts in this field were hit and miss. No better, no worse than anybody else. The ones who were known as experts in this field, the ones in the media, the commentators, they were badly off. Now, why? My belief is those who are popular in the media, that everyone in the media listens to for their advice and to explain what's going on in the world, basically is there because they reflect the views of those who are watching. Those who see the world a certain way pick Fox News today. Those see it another way pick MSNBC. Very few people pick CNN. And less people are picking CBS. But anyway, those people may or may not be right. But the truth is, most people watch it not because they are right, it's because their opinions and validated and points of view about the world are validated. And that's what they're looking for. People are looking and hoping that the world is going to turn out the way they want it to. Well, hope and belief that the world is going to turn out the way you want it to, I would say, is very poor grounds for making accurate predictions. And so Dr. Philip Tetlock found that out. What he found out was the ones who made the most accurate predictions were a combination of what he called hedgehogs and foxes. This is an old paradigm in psychology. And these paradigms reflect the way how people think. Hedgehogs have generally a framework, an ideology or point of view with which they view the world. Libertarians see it one way. Capitalists see it another way. Socialists see the world another way. Born-again Christians see the world another way. Hasidic Jews see it another way. All these people have a point of view about the world and what's going to happen and what they want to happen in it. These are people with a strong framework. At the opposite end of the spectrum, Philip Tetlock said there were the foxes. The foxes may have had a framework, but they were basically identified by their movement. They were always on top of what was going on, watching. See it move here, see it move there. And so, whereas the predictions of the ideologues, the hedgehogs, were always straight, set forward, like a Jehovah's Witness. If you had asked a Jehovah's Witness 50 years ago what was going to happen, I would say it's pretty close to what a Jehovah's Witness would say today. All right? The foxes, what they say today is going to be different from what they're going to say tomorrow because events rapidly change. Tadlock found out that when he collated all these answers and tested them, that the ones who were the most accurate were a combination of hedgehogs and foxes. Their thinking combined both. They had a framework, and yet they watched everything that was going on. But the distinction was this: they wouldn't make a predictive choice until the two felt right. Even though they were watching everything move quickly, they would not predict something until they believed somehow within themselves that the prediction was now validated by a combination of events or what they believed to be right. Well, Marshall had all of us at the Positive Deviant Network on that day, on March 1st, 2007, take Philip Tetlock's test. And it's interesting. The person in the room who scored the highest in the terms, not highest in terms of predictive ability, but in terms of more correct answers, was the only person in that room, I believe, out of the 60 to 70 people, and most of them had a lot of money. Dues were $5,000 a year. We met 4 times a year. Was a guy who dealt with feedback and biocybernetics, and he got more answers right than anyone in the room. And I think he was the only one in the room who was into gold and silver. This is 2007. I scored the highest in terms of predictive ability. I scored 0 deviation, which was the perfect balance between hedgehogs and foxes. And so I'm telling you this because what I'm going to predict is going to happen, most of you don't believe is going to happen and don't want it to happen. And like I say, I don't know if I'm right. None of us know if we're right, even though on one level, each one of us believes that they're right. I did score 0 deviation on Tetlock's test, and I was right about predicting a severe economic crisis was going to happen soon. It happened the next year. And what I'm going to say today, I'm going to predict what is about to happen, what we're going to go into. I think the next 5 years are going to be very, very, very rough. They're going to be very difficult. And whether I am around to see how it resolves is itself problematic and questionable. I'm 81. So, in terms of actuarial tables, my chances or the odds of me being here when this, what I call the great rearrangement, is over and the world, the better world to come, is in motion, is itself in question. What I want to say, though, I also believe that whether many of those on Earth right now are going to be around in 5 years is also questionable. That's how extreme I think the transition is about to be. Hippies were known for saying the Aquarian Age is coming, golden age of peace, brotherhood, abundance, sharing is coming. And I think what the hippies said back in the 1960s was right. I wasn't sure at the time. I had just dropped out of law school and just started becoming a hippie. The hippies were always saying that. What I know now, that I didn't know then, however, is not only is the age of Aquarius is being born, what I didn't know then, an episiotomy was going to be required for its birth. We are on the edge of the resolution of that economic crisis that I predicted in 2007, and it's going to be a game changer. And to talk about that, I want to go back to my book and bring up the writings of somebody who saw what was coming. And his name is Buckminster Fuller. You may know about him. Bucky is quite an extraordinary person. And if you don't know, I think you should go to the web and Google in his name. But anyway, he's the person who talked about, in my belief, I'm going to introduce, he was the one who validates or agrees, or I agree with what he said was going to happen. In 1981, Bucky wrote a book. I'm going to quote from my book, Doctrine of the Mothership, in which I quote from Bucky's book, Critical Path. But in 1981, Bucky wrote his last major book called Critical Path, and that was his advice to humanity about the crisis that he said was starting then in 1981. The introduction to Critical Path was entitled Twilight of the World's Power Structures. And Bucky said mankind was entering a period of unprecedented crises, a period in which we were going to see the collapse of political, economic, and religious institutions. But he said the collapse of the world as we knew it or knew it then would be necessary to pave the way for the world that was going to succeed it. He said this in 1981, and he predicted that the world's power structures were going to collapse. 10 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed. And now today in 2026, you're seeing the collapse of the socialist Soviet Union, capitalism collapsing. Most people do not understand money, and they don't understand capitalism, and they don't understand socialism, why either one existed and where they came from. But the truth of the matter is, the bankers have convinced people that capitalism is free markets. Well, capitalism is a free market compared only to a communist controlled market. Capitalist markets aren't free. Free markets are based upon supply and demand. In a free market, prices are always set by the supply of a good and the demands for it. In capitalist markets, prices are not determined by supply and demand. Supply and demand they qualify the process. All right, they're important in it. But in capitalist societies, economies, the determinant factor is the cost of credit. That's why today you're watching the Fed set its interest rates with absolute intensity. The cost of credit is what determines the price of goods and services in a capitalist economy. Why? Because money in a capitalist economy is not what money was in a free market economy. In free market economies, money was a unit based on real value, on a positive value. It represented savings. And in free markets, previous free markets, the savings were usually monetary metals, copper, gold, or silver. When capitalist markets arose, and they were introduced by the Bank of England in 1791, what was introduced, the nature of money changed. Money was no longer savings-based. Money no longer, well, it represented value, but its origins and derivation were not from value. When England started its debt-based money, it did back it with silver, all right? So it was convertible to silver, which gave it stability. But what it really was, it was not a savings-based unit. It was a debt-based unit masquerading as a savings-based unit. The money itself was issued from a bank, a central bank, in the form of a loan. All money today is merely circulating credit and debt. And unlike England in 1791, it is no longer convertible to anything of value. The money that you pay with today is created out of thin air by banks based upon the amount of your savings that they have in their vaults. And based upon the savings they have of your money, in capitalist societies, those banks are allowed to issue 10 times that amount in credit back to you. And let me tell you something. Even though it's your money that determines how much credit that they can issue, the interest that they give you for your money in their bank is far less than the interest they charge you on the credit that they give back to you based on the amount of money that you got in their bank. In the next video, I'm going to talk about more of the Great Rearrangement, the economic collapse of the debt-based money on society, on our world, and how it's going to change it.
Love is still here waiting for us to find our heart, instead of thinking AI can replace the holy art of trusting in the future and knowing what to do, of trusting again in life and love, and knowing I am you. Time to trust, time to know. Something's going on. It's time to grow. Time to trust, time to know. Something's going on. It's time to grow.